In 1854, British archaeologist William Loftus pulled a fractured clay tablet from the ruins of ancient Uruk in southern Iraq. It was logged, crated, and shipped to the British Museum, where it sat unread for nearly 170 years. The cuneiform on it was an older dialect than anything in the standard Mesopotamian corpus, and the handful of scholars who attempted to publish on it never finished. In 2018, a private institution funded a complete translation. 2 of the 3 linguists assigned to the project requested anonymity in the final report. The third quietly left academia within 6 months of delivery. The tablet does not describe a war. It does not describe a flood. It describes, in clinical first-person prose, what happens to a human consciousness in the first 90 seconds after physical death. And then it describes, with the same clinical detail, what happens to the ones who refuse the option they are offered. 12 sequences, 12 codes. The first 3 lay out the geography of the threshold. The middle 4 describe the decision point itself. The final 5 describe what happens to those who choose the other path, the one that almost no modern source will talk about openly. I have spent the last 11 months reading every leaked passage, every quietly retracted academic paper, and every page of Zecharia Sitchin's later notebooks that reference the Uruk fragment. What follows is not theory. It is what the scribe carved into the clay. And the part that has stayed with me, the part I could not put down once I finished reading it, is the line about why the system was built in the first place. Because according to this tablet, the light is not what you have been told it is. Code 1, the naming. The Sumerians had 2 separate words for what lay beyond death. The standard public-facing term was Kur, which most translators have rendered as the underworld or the land of no return. It is the word that appears in the surviving literature, in the hymns, in the funerary inscriptions. It is the word the general population knew, but there was a second word used only in priestly contexts, and it appears on this tablet 7 times. The word is Edin Nazu. It translates approximately to the field that knows you, not a place, a condition. A territory that reacts to the consciousness entering it, that responds to who you are and what you carry in with you. The standard Sumerian afterlife, the one taught in textbooks, was a dim shadow realm where the dead ate dust and forgot their names. The tablet describes something very different. It describes a region with 2 routes through it, and a clear decision point between them. Code 2, the path. Within 90 seconds of physical death, the tablet says, the consciousness experiences a separation. The scribe describes it as a lifting away from the body that no longer answers. There is no pain. There is no fear at first. There is a sensation the scribe records as recognition, as if something you had forgotten you knew is suddenly clear again. The body, from this vantage, looks small and remote. The room, if you are in a room, looks unfamiliar in its geometry, but familiar in its detail. You are aware of being observed, but the observers are not yet visible. The tablet specifies that this phase lasts somewhere between 40 and 110 seconds, depending on what the scribe calls the weight of the person dying. He does not define weight in physical terms. He defines it in terms of unresolved obligations, of relationships unfinished, of words left unsaid, of the small unfinished business that, in his words, keeps the consciousness tethered for a few extra moments before the field opens. Code 3. The light. At the end of that separation phase, something appears. The tablet calls it Mi-Lam, which the standard dictionaries translate as terrifying radiance or divine aura. But the context on this tablet is entirely different. The scribe describes it as warm, not terrifying. He describes it as familiar, even welcoming. He describes it as something that feels like the resolution of every question you have ever asked, all at once. And he describes it as a doorway. The light is not an experience. It is an entry point. And the tablet is extremely specific about this. The light does not come for you. It waits. It is positioned, and it expects you to walk toward it under your own power. The scribe is careful to note this, and he repeats it twice on the same column of the tablet, which in Sumerian convention is the equivalent of underlining a sentence. You're not pulled in, You walk in, and what you walk in toward is the question. The question the scribe spent the entire next column of the tablet preparing the reader to face, because once the question is asked, the asking cannot be reversed. And before we go further, I need to pause for a second, because what I'm about to tell you gets significantly darker, and I realized a while ago that some of this cannot be fully explained in a video format. The complete decoding of all 12 codes, the tablet numbers, the translated passages, the astronomical date they specified down to the degree. I put it all into a written document. It's linked below, and the QR code is on your screen. Now let's continue. Code 4. The voice. Inside the light or behind it, depending on how you read the scribe's spatial language, there is a voice. The tablet records it as the one who speaks before remembering. The voice does not give you instructions. It gives you a single question, and the question has only 2 valid answers. The scribe writes the question in archaic Sumerian, and the most reliable modern translation reads, "Will you come home now?" That is the entire question. There is no qualifier. There is no explanation of what home means or where it is or who is waiting there. The 2 valid answers are yes and no. Any other response, the tablet says, defaults to no. Silence defaults to no. Hesitation past a certain interval defaults to no. The system does not require an active refusal. It only requires the absence of a clear yes. Code 5. The pull. If the answer is yes, the tablet describes a smooth transition. The light expands, the voice becomes plural, and the consciousness enters what the scribe calls the inner field. From the perspective of the person dying, this is the standard near-death account that has been reported by hospital patients and resuscitation survivors for decades. Tunnel, light, warmth, deceased relatives, a sense of unity, a review of life events. All of it is consistent with what the tablet describes. The scribe records this path as the intended path, the one the system was designed for, the one that, according to the tablet, completes a contract that was signed before the body was born. Code 6. The question before the question. But the tablet says something else about this moment that is not in any modern near-death account I have ever read. Before the voice asks the question, there is a fraction of a second the scribe describes as the seeing. In that fraction of a second, the consciousness is shown the terms of the contract, not in words, in a kind of compressed knowing. You see what you agreed to, who you agreed with, and what happens after you say yes. And here is the part of the tablet that I had to sit with for a long time before I could write this section. The scribe does not describe this seeing as comforting. He describes it as the reason some people refuse. Code 7. The refusal. According to the tablet, a refusal is not a passive event. The moment a consciousness declines the light, something specific happens. The scribe describes it in 3 stages, and his description is methodical, almost forensic. First, the light recedes. Not fades, but recedes, as if it is being pulled back into whatever positioned it there. The doorway closes from the inside. Second, the warmth ends. The temperature of the surrounding environment, which up to this point had no temperature at all because the consciousness was not embodied, suddenly becomes something the scribe describes as the cold that is not in the air but in the awareness. He writes that it is a cold the consciousness feels as a sudden absence of being known, as if the field that had been holding you in its attention has stopped looking at you. Third, the observers who had been watching from outside the visible range become visible. The tablet calls them gala, the same name Sumerian myths give to the demonic enforcers who pursued Inanna in her descent through the 7 gates. But the scribe describes them differently. He does not describe them as demons. He describes them as agents, functionaries. The system has a protocol for refusers, and the gala are the ones who execute it. They do not speak. They do not threaten. They simply arrive, and they accompany the consciousness to where it goes next. Code 8. The drift. After the refusal, the tablet says, the consciousness enters a region the scribe calls Ki Shar Anshar, which translates roughly to between the levels. This is not heaven. This is not hell. It is a kind of holding area. The tablet describes it as resembling the world the dead person just left, but with subtle wrongnesses, like a memory that has been compressed and decompressed too many times. The colors are slightly off. The sounds do not match the visual sources. People appear and disappear without warning. Buildings sometimes have one extra story or one missing one. Rooms have furniture that the consciousness vaguely remembers from a different house. The dead person can see the living, can sometimes hear them, but cannot be heard or seen in return. The scribe describes this as the most disorienting feature of the drift, more disorienting than the cold, more disorienting than the silence. You can watch your own family, but you cannot reach them. You can watch the world you just left continue without you, and you cannot intervene in any direction. The scribe writes that the most common experience for new arrivals in the drift is the slow realization that nothing they do registers anywhere. Words make no sound. Hands pass through objects. The living look right through them, sometimes more than once. This is the realm of the unmoored dead, the ones who refuse the light. And according to the tablet, the duration of this phase is not fixed. It depends entirely on whether the refuser eventually changes their mind and whether the system gives them the option to do so. The scribe is very clear on one point. The longer a consciousness stays in the drift, the harder it becomes to leave. Code 9, the trap. This is the part of the tablet that the project linguists reportedly argued about for weeks. The scribe describes a specific mechanism that activates when a consciousness has been in the drift for what he calls 3 turns of the Watcher star. The standard reading puts that interval somewhere between 30 and 70 of our current Earth years. After that interval, the consciousness becomes what the tablet calls Lil La, a word usually translated as wandering spirit, but more precisely meaning the one who has lost the thread back. At this point, the original offer is permanently revoked. The light does not come back. The voice does not return. The consciousness is now a permanent resident of the drift, and the only way out, according to the scribe, is to attach itself to a living body, which the tablet describes as both possible and forbidden by the system that designed it. This is, almost word for word, what every culture on this planet has called a haunting, a possession, an attachment. The tablet says these phenomena are not supernatural events. They are statistical inevitabilities. They are what happens when too many consciousnesses refuse the light and the holding area gets crowded. The scribe writes that the system has tolerances for a certain background rate of attachment, but when the drift population exceeds those tolerances, the attachments become more frequent, more aggressive, and harder for the living to detect. Before we move on to the next code, stop for a second. What you just heard about code 9 is the part that changes everything, but it only makes sense when you see it written out next to the original Sumerian notation. The population number, the trigger conditions, it's all in the document linked below. Take 5 seconds right now, grab it, and then come back, because what comes next builds directly on it. The link is in the description. QR code is on your screen. Code 10, the architecture. The tablet does something here that no other Sumerian text does. It describes who designed the system. The scribe does not use the word gods. He uses a phrase that translates as the ones who supervise the threshold. These are not the Anunnaki of the standard creation story. They are described as a separate administrative body, older than the Anunnaki, that the Anunnaki themselves reported to in matters of the afterlife. The scribe refers to them only twice in the tablet, and both times the language he uses is careful, almost cautious, as if naming them too directly is a risk he is unwilling to take. He calls them, in one passage, the ones whose names are not for the tongue, and in another, the ones who were here before the field was opened. The implication is unmistakable. The system that processes human consciousness after death was not built by the gods the Sumerians worshipped at street level. It was built by something further up the chain, something the priesthood knew about but did not name in public. And the scribe seems to be writing this tablet, at least in part, because he believes that knowledge needs to survive whatever is coming next. Code 11, the purpose. Why is the system there? The tablet gives an answer, and it is not the answer you would expect from a religious text. The system is not a moral filter. It is not weighing your sins. It is not measuring your worthiness. The system, according to the tablet, exists for one functional reason. It is a recycling protocol. The light is the entry point to a process the scribe describes as bal-ag, which translates as the turning back. Consciousness is returned to a central pool, and from that pool it is reassigned, redistributed, and redeployed. The tablet does not soften this. The scribe uses the same vocabulary that Sumerian administrators used for inventory management, for rotating workers between projects, for cycling materials through a workshop. The light is the return chute. Everyone who says yes goes back into circulation, and the ones who say no are removed from circulation, but not in a way that benefits them. They are quarantined in the drift, where they cannot contribute to the cycle and cannot escape it. The system was not designed for refusers. Refusers are a glitch in a protocol that was supposed to be airtight, and the tablet specifies that the rate of refusal has been increasing for centuries, which is putting pressure on the holding area in ways the original designers did not plan for. Whatever the supervisors built this for, whatever they get from the cycle, that yield is being interrupted by a growing minority of consciousnesses who are looking at the contract in the fraction of a second before the voice speaks and deciding they want nothing further to do with it. Code 12, the witnesses. The tablet ends with a final passage that I want to read to you as close to its original phrasing as the translation allows. There are ones, the scribe writes, who have seen the field and returned. They came back with the cold still on them. They speak of the light, but they do not speak of the voice. The voice they were forbidden to repeat. They speak of the field, but they do not speak of the drift. The drift they were not permitted to enter because they had not yet refused. They returned to tell the living what was offered. They were not permitted to tell them what was not offered. This is the tablet's description of what we now call the near-death experience. People who flatline on the operating table are resuscitated and come back reporting tunnels and lights and deceased relatives. The tablet says, in essence, that these people are seeing the system from the outside. They are not refusing. They are not accepting. They are interrupted. The decision point is suspended for them, and then they are returned to the body before the question is fully asked. And this is why, according to the tablet, the modern accounts of near-death experiences are almost entirely uniform on the light, the warmth, the relatives, and the sense of peace, but go silent on what comes next. The next part is restricted. The witnesses were allowed to come back. They were not allowed to come back with the full picture. But there is a smaller separate category of accounts that does describe what comes after. The medical literature calls them distressing near-death experiences, and they make up somewhere between 9 and 20% of all reported cases, depending on which study you read. Most clinicians refuse to publish on them. The patients who report them describe being pulled away from the light rather than toward it. They describe a cold, gray environment. They describe figures watching them from just outside the field of view. They describe a feeling of being processed, not welcomed. Some describe being escorted by silent entities through what feels like a corridor or a waiting area. Some describe seeing other people in that same corridor, all of them confused, none of them able to communicate with each other. The standard interpretation in the medical community is that these experiences are caused by stress, by medication, by anesthesia, complications, by anything other than what the patients actually describe. But if you set the tablet next to the distressing case files side by side, the language overlaps in ways that are difficult to dismiss. The patients are not describing hell. They are describing the drift, and the staff treating them have no framework for what they are hearing, because the framework was carved into clay 5,000 years ago and then locked in a museum basement where almost no one has been allowed to read it. The tablet specifies a location where a second complete copy is buried, not in southern Iraq, not in Uruk where the fragment was found. The scribe describes a sealed chamber beneath what he calls the Mountain of the Watcher, which translators have identified as a location in what is now southeastern Turkey, near the Göbekli Tepe complex. Göbekli Tepe was deliberately buried by its own builders around 8000 BCE for reasons that mainstream archaeology has never adequately explained. The official position is that the site was decommissioned. The unofficial position, held quietly by a number of senior archaeologists who will not put their names to it on the record, is that the site was sealed because something at the lower levels was not supposed to be accessible. The lower layers have not been excavated. The Turkish government issued a moratorium on deep excavation in 2019, citing site preservation concerns. 2 of the senior archaeologists who had been pushing for further work have since retired from the project. A third was reassigned to a museum administrative role. The chambers below the carved pillars remain sealed. Whatever else is on the complete tablet, if the fragment is to be believed, is still down there waiting for someone who is either authorized to find it or willing to find it without authorization. And the scribe adds one final line. He writes that the system was not designed to last forever, that at some point in the future, the protocol would be reviewed and the holding area emptied. He gives a marker for when this review would happen. It is not a date, it is a condition. He describes it as the moment when the number of refusers in the drift exceeds the number of living humans on the surface. According to the demographers who have privately looked at this passage in conjunction with global mortality data over the last several centuries, that threshold may be closer than anyone has publicly admitted. Some estimates, working from cumulative human deaths since the dawn of agriculture and applying even a low refusal rate, suggest the threshold may already have been crossed sometime in the 20th century. If the tablet is correct, the review is no longer hypothetical. It has already been triggered. And what an administrative review of the drift looks like from the inside is something the scribe does not describe, because he does not know either. He only knows it was scheduled. He only knows that whatever comes after that review is not something the consciousnesses currently in the drift are going to have a vote in. The fragment from Uruk is currently held in a secure storage section of the British Museum that is not open to the public. The 2018 translation was delivered to the funding institution under a non-disclosure agreement that the museum has declined to comment on. The 2 linguists who requested anonymity have not published any further work on Sumerian material. The third has changed careers entirely and does not respond to inquiries about her time on the project. The only public-facing reference to the translation appears in a 2020 footnote in a journal article on Mesopotamian funerary practices, where the lead author obliquely thanks a colleague for sharing unpublished material on the Uruk fragment. That colleague is not named. The footnote was removed in a corrected version of the article published 6 months later, with no editorial explanation provided. Whatever you make of this, the question the scribe carved into the clay is the same question every human consciousness will eventually be asked. Will you come home now? And the tablet wants you to know that home is not a place. It is a process. The process has rules. The light is real. The voice is real. The choice is real. And the consequences of the choice on both sides of it were documented in clay 5,000 years ago by a scribe who had been instructed to leave a warning for the people who would come after him. The scribe ends the tablet with one last sentence that I have not been able to stop reading. He writes that he does not know what the right answer to the question is. He writes that he was not given the answer, he was only given the system and instructed to record it, so that whoever read his tablet would at least know that the question was coming, and would have a chance to think about it before the voice arrived. He himself has not yet had to face the question. By the time you read this, he writes, "I will have." That last line is the most haunting in the document. The scribe knew he was about to die and the question was coming. The tablet does not tell us what he decided. He gives a complete account of the system, the paths, the consequences, but leaves out the one piece of information the reader would most want to know. Whether he said yes or no, the tablet does not say. Some of the linguists who worked on the 2018 translation believe this omission was deliberate, that the scribe withheld his own answer because the choice needed to be made by each consciousness, on its own terms, without the weight of someone else's decision on it. Others believe the answer was on the broken edge of the tablet, the section that did not survive. Look at the room you're sitting in. Look at the people you love. Listen to the ordinary sounds around you, the hum of the appliances, the small noises of an ordinary day. The tablet says you have already signed the contract. The terms are already set. The only question that remains is what you will do when the light arrives, and whether you will know in that moment what it is actually offering you,